Hello, everybody. Welcome to Relax with Animal Facts. I am Steph Wolf, and I'm here to learn some facts with you about our furry, scaly, or possibly even slimy friends, all while relaxing and sometimes going a little bit off topic. And that's how I believe the best learning happens sometimes, is if you kind of go off topic and connect it maybe to something else that you're talking about. So any of you new people tuning in, so this is a podcast where I go over animals that I want to learn about, or maybe other people want to learn about, depending on if people are writing in. In this case, it's polar bears, which I would love to learn more about. I don't know too much about them, so I learn here right with you. I go on the internet, I find facts, and I just kind of go over them with you and maybe connect them to different animals that we've learned already. I think this is episode maybe number 11, I think. Yeah, I think it's the sloth episode. If you haven't listened to that episode, you can go ahead and listen to it. The sloth episode is the 10th one, I think. So 10th anniversary. There you go. So really quickly, I just want to talk about social media. So soon I'm going to be opening up a social media account for the podcast, mostly just for like polls as to what kind of animals you guys would like to listen to. Or would like to learn more about. So that's pretty much it. But until that happens, if you want to learn about a specific animal, you could always write in to relaxwithanimalfacts@gmail.com, and yeah, I'll look into it. So you can listen to this podcast a number of ways. It seems as though the majority of you guys out there enjoy putting this on before bedtime, and that's absolutely great. I'm glad that you kind of you can use the podcast to wind down a little bit and learn, right? Just focus your mind on something, and you can drift off. Or maybe it's the middle of the day and you would like to learn about some animal facts in a relaxing way. You could be walking around, you could be sitting on a comfy chair out there, maybe laying on a comfy couch, comfy sofa of some kind. So there's all different ways of listening to the podcast. You don't have to be attentive. You can tune in and out, or you can just have this on as background noise. It is all the same. I'm with you here for roughly half an hour, 35 minutes sometimes. So listen how you will. I encourage it all. So before I get into the show, I just want to tell you guys where I got my facts from. As always, in this case, I got them from two different sources. We have polarbearsinternational.org, and that's on their page on polar bears. I mean, it's Polar Bears International. And then the other one is another staple website, WWF.org. They have 11 facts about polar bears. That's where I got this from, so from that page. So if you guys want to learn more, you can always visit those sites and check out what else they got. The polarbearsinternational.org I liked especially because they actually have a polar bear tracker where you can see the patterns of different polar bears happening actually close to Canada where I'm from. So it's really interesting. You can actually see how far they've traveled and everything. So that's a really cool tool. When I was looking at running down some of the facts, I saw that there's a polar bear tracker. And you can also adopt a polar bear too. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Okay, anyways, so let's get into the show. So polar bears are actually classified as marine mammals. I did not think they were classified as marine mammals. I didn't know exactly what they were classified as, but marine mammals wasn't my number one kind of thought there. But it's due to the majority of their lives being spent on the sea ice of the Arctic Ocean, and they have a dependency on the ocean for food and for habitat and whatnot. So they're actually the only bear species to be considered marine mammals. As you guys know, we have the other bear species. We have black bears, we have grizzly bears, and we'll talk about kind of some mixes actually that we have as well. But those bears are mostly they live in kind of forests and whatnot, so they're not really aquatic. But I know other bears they rely on other things like creeks and rivers for fish and whatnot. So, but not marine mammals. Those are polar bears specifically. So if you didn't know that, like I didn't know that, that's a cool fact. Let's get into some physical characteristics of the polar bear. So this is specifically, there's a lot of characteristics that the polar bear has that I find is super interesting because they're absolutely perfectly adapted to their environment. So, just like many other animals out there, they have these evolutionary adaptations that have had an advantage in their survival. And in the case of the polar bear, it seems as though every single bit of their physical characteristics, I apologize, is specifically for the Arctic, and it's amazing. So they can weigh up to 800 kilograms. So that's actually about 1,760 pounds, which is a very, very respectable weight. That is about the size or about the weight of 10 adult human men. And the male polar bears are twice the size, around twice the size of the female polar bears. So 1,760 pounds for you guys out there using pounds. So, they can also be around 3 meters long, which means that this is a absolutely huge animal. It actually makes them the largest land carnivore in the entire world, as far as we know, of course. So 3 meters, that's like 9'8". So 9'8". Again, the 9'8", there's no human being that's 9'8". But if you were to take a 9'8" human, horizontally, that's how long a polar bear is, also weighing it in at 1,760 pounds. So very, very massive animal. And to me, that makes me think, because, right, they're going on sea ice, which is kind of thinning out, and it's interesting how they can actually stay above ice. I think we've all at one point in time tried to run across ice or something, and there are YouTube videos of people falling into ice and then having to climb out. But having an animal that is 1,760 pounds, running across the ice or walking across the ice, it's incredible to me. We'll get into some adaptations of how they what they can do to not fall in the ice, or what they do naturally. It's just interesting to me. Let's talk about their fur, because they're really recognized as having this glistening white kind of perfect shampooed, conditioned fur. Not really, but it looks really nice. But it's made up of a super dense and insulating underfur that is also topped by guard hairs that have different lengths. So fur in their case is a vital tool in their insulation, because of course they're living in pretty harsh conditions in terms of temperature, very low temperatures, and that thick fur acts as a prevention for almost all heat loss. And you can even see polar bears, they can actually quickly overheat when they run. If you can imagine being in the Arctic and overheating, in the case of polar bears, that's a reality, because they have such thick fur. But again, perfectly adapted to their environment without this kind of thick fur. You can see this with a lot of other animals that live in the Arctic. For example, maybe another good candidate for the podcast would be there's a Arctic fox, I believe, and they have this very dense, thick, white sort of fur coloration. So you'll see these animals all having kind of similar characteristics. I even think there's a hare, like a bunny, Arctic hare, I believe. Okay, I'm getting off topic. But they can actually run. We're talking about overheating when they run, so let's talk about how fast they can run. They can run up to 40 kilometers an hour or 25 miles per hour on land. For a 800 kilogram bear running 40 kilometers an hour, or for you people in the United States, 25 miles per hour, that is incredibly fast. That is a very respectable, God knows I can't run 40 kilometers an hour. So, if I'm ever caught between me and a polar bear, hungry polar bear, I don't know, I can't really do much, I guess, I don't know. But 40 kilometers an hour. So I'm trying to imagine driving around 40 kilometers an hour. That is incredibly fast. Wow. And their fur is actually not white, but it just looks that way. So each hair shaft is actually pigment free, and pigment is what gives coloration generally to animals. And we talked about with the flamingo, for example, right? If you guys remember the flamingo episode, we talked about where is that pink coloration coming from, and it was coming from beta carotene in what they eat in fish or crustaceans. And in their case, each hair shaft is pigment free, so there's no pigment, and it's actually transparent, and it has that hollow core that when that light comes in, that visible light comes in, it actually scatters and reflects, very similar to how ice and snow work. So it gives you that white, that very white coloration. And the main time you'll actually see them having that super white fur is if it's if the sun is really reflecting off them, like if the sun is really out there and you can they're standing in the right spot. But you'll actually see a lot of polar bears have that yellowish coloration, and that just comes from their diet, so what they're eating, and it also just comes from the fact that maybe you didn't catch them in the best of light at that time. So just like human beings like to make sure they have the best light for Instagram photos or for whatever, polar bears also have that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone in terms of where they can look their most kind of like reflectively white, right? But what's interesting though is that underneath all that fur that they have, their skin is actually jet black, super black skin, and super counterintuitive. When you see an animal that is completely white everywhere in terms of fur, but they are a very kind of matte sort of black color. It's interesting. I just love that nature sometimes throws a curveball, being like, hey, this is. It's not what you think, right? And it's always super interesting to learn something like that. So I wouldn't have known that in a million years if I wasn't having fun on this podcast. Their skin lies over a super thick layer of fat that will measure up to about 4.5 inches. So 4.5 inches is a lot of fat. For any of you guys that use centimeters out there, I don't know off the top of my head how many centimeters that is, but 4.5 inches is a thick layer of fat, and we're still talking about the physical adaptations here that polar bears have. So it's important because they swim fairly often, their fur gets wet, and if you've ever had anything wet on you, for example, if you say you get caught in the rain with a kind of like a cotton sweater or something that becomes easily wet, kind of sticks to your skin, you'll know that it actually is not a very good insulator. Once a breeze comes by and you have a wet, if you have wet hair or if you have wet whatever, you'll know that is not very good for heat insulation. You will be cold. You'll be colder than if it was dry. And in this case, when this happens fairly often, because they swim a lot, they will rely on this 4.5 inch fat deposit that they have when they're in the water to be able to keep warm. And this is why you won't see the mama bears kind of taking their young cubs into the water. They'll be more hesitant. They'll be like, I don't really think so. If they don't really have to do it, and that's because they don't yet have have the fat necessary to have those kind of long swims, and they can actually they can die. It's possible. So they'll actually wait until they are a little bit older, have more fat to be able to have a good amount of heat insulation, because we're still talking about the Arctic here. But the polar bear will overheat when they run. I think that's amazing. And even small things like their ears, for example. Their ears are small and they're round, and their tails are short and compact, and this is all to conserve as much heat as possible. So every bit of this bear has adaptation, it seems like. There's a reason for everything. And even their paws. Their paws will measure about 12 inches across. So if you've ever been to Subway before, actually I don't even think Subway has 12. When they say a foot long, right, which is 12 inches, I don't think that their sandwiches are actually 12 inches long. I'm not exactly sure, but they look more like 10 inches than they do 12. But 12 inches, so 1 foot across. So from one side to the other side, which is huge. That is a large amount of surface area. And that allows bears to be able to tread on thin ice. So just like what we talked about before, if you've ever tried to run, across ice, the possibility of falling through is kind of high, depending, of course, on the thickness of the ice that you're running on. But polar bears have a kind of a natural, instinctual response to when they know that the ice is kind of it's not as thick as it should be for them. They will actually kind of lower their bodies, and they will extend their legs sort of far apart, and they'll do this really odd sort of shuffling across. But they do this for weight distribution. This is kind of physics 101 here. They didn't have to go to a university to learn this, I guess, or college. They just know that weight distribution is a thing. And in the case of human beings, I'm sure that you guys have heard before that if you're caught out on ice somewhere and it's thin and whatnot, the safest thing for you to do is to lay down. And this is A, for weight distribution, and B, general surface area coverage. So if you have more surface area, you have more weight distribution. So instead of standing on one point, allowing all your weight to kind of go through, your feet while you're standing, there's a higher chance you're going to fall in. And in the case of polar bears, when they don't want to get wet, when they do not actually want to get wet, they will, do this sort of odd shuffling, laying down on the, lowering their bodies and kind of extending their legs sort of far apart. So very smart adaptation to where they are in their habitat. And polar bears can swim constantly for days at a time. This I didn't know. Days at a time, that is incredible. I don't believe that. I don't know how many humans have swam constantly for days at a time. I'm sure maybe it's been done in the past in some sense, maybe for a Guinness book, for a Guinness World Record or something. But they can swim up to 6 miles per hour, which is fast, for a huge animal. And they have large paws that are adapted for swimming. So their large paws carry 2 sort of adaptations, or maybe even more. The first one being super having a lot of surface area there, which will allow for more weight distribution, so more surface area. And also, when they're swimming, having these very large, 12-inch across paws will help, as they will actually act as paddles for swimming. So if you've ever wore rubber flippers, it's sort of the same thing, or like the same concept rather. And their hind legs, they will actually hold their legs flat like a rudder, and this will allow them to steer sort of back and forth, which is really funny. Imagine this huge animal holding their hind legs flat like a rudder and just paddling across. But again, these are animals that have totally figured out their environment and how to traverse it properly. However, just because they can swim for days at a time, they do need sea ice. Sea ice is such a vital part of how they hunt and how they eat, and it makes it absolutely critical for their survival. So, quick aside, I watched a Netflix documentary. I think it was about polar bears or about the Arctic in general. I'm not sure, but there was a little segment about how they hunt, and it was really interesting. There was just I think it was a bearded seal of some kind. It's one of their main food sources or prey, just lying on top of a piece of sea ice, just in the middle. There was just this piece of sea ice, and the polar bear just kind of swims around and comes up behind, and sort of, they actually are pretty stealthy for being large animals. Swim behind and sort of try to jump up on the sea ice and grab the seal before it's able to get back into the water to run away successfully. But that being said, around or like less than 2% of polar bear hunts are actually successful. So, while they can be stealthy, its prey is also, or, they're also kind of on the lookout all the time, and the diminishing sea ice makes it more and more difficult for polar bears to hunt, effectively. So it was just funny to see kind of a polar bear peek its head up from behind a piece of sea ice and jump up off, onto the sea ice and chase them off. And we'll talk about one other way that they actually hunt in just a second. But when a polar bear gets dirty, like their coat gets dirty, they will actually rub and sort of roll around in the snow to clean off their fur. They much prefer to be clean and to be dry, because, as we talked about before, wet fur and also dirty fur can be a very bad insulator. And insulation in the climate that they're in is a top-notch sort of priority. So they will kind of do this little rub and roll around, just like how dogs sometimes like to roll around in the snow. Maybe not for the same reason, but I think it's a good adaptation. And now we're just going to talk about something interesting, which is that polar bears touch noses to ask to share food. So sharing in the animal kingdom is I think it's fewer and far between than it is maybe with human beings. I mean, I'm sure human beings have trouble sharing too sometimes, but polar bears will. If another polar bear comes and they would like to eat, and maybe there's plenty of food, there's another polar bear. The polar bear will actually kind of circle around the food, around the polar bear, and come in gently to sort of try to touch noses and kind of ask for permission. And I guess sometimes they will allow the bear to kind of join in, or they won't. In the case of if they're really hungry and they need it. They actually have home ranges. So a lot of animals have territories and whatnot, but just like the koala, actually, there's actually, I think koalas are territorial in a way, but with the polar bear, they have home ranges. So just like a koala has home ranges, like we talked about before, you guys loved that episode. I appreciate it. So they have these same kind of home ranges, but it's really dispersed, and they don't really like to have conflict between one another. So it'll be, it will overlap often with other polar bear. Like their home ranges will overlap with each other, and it's totally fine in that case. Grizzly polar bear hybrids actually do exist. They're known as growler bears or even pizzly bears. Which one do I like better? I think growler sounds better. Pizzly sounds, I don't know. I don't imagine something being called a pizzly bear. I'd prefer a growler. But polar bears evolved from brown bears around 150,000 years ago, which is still fairly recent in terms of evolutionary history, right? I just think it's amazing that time is all relative, that human beings live to be about, average of 80 years old, but we're talking about, 150,000 years ago being fairly recent in terms of evolutionary history. So it puts things into perspective for me. And there's a total population of approximately 26,000 wild polar bears. And of those 26,000 polar bears, they're actually divided into 19 sort of subpopulations. So plenty of subpopulations, and the different subpopulations are at different kind of levels. So levels meaning, one might be kind of stable, one might be endangered, one might be vulnerable, whatever it be. And they have those specific stats online, and you guys can search those up if you'd like. I always encourage you guys to be passionate about some animals that maybe strike you, that you like. And I think that polar bears strike a chord with people because, there was a big campaign, a bunch of years ago about climate change and about polar bears, and polar bears seem to be this sort of mascot for climate change. So I think that they strike a chord with a lot of people. And rightfully so. These are amazing animals. Wild polar bears can live up to 30 years, but the average is actually around 15 to 18 years. So fairly close to dogs here, depending on which breed and depending on, a variety of factors. But 15 to 18 years, that was kind of a surprise for me, because when you see larger animals, they actually usually live to be a little bit older, such as gorillas living to be 40, or other larger animals living to be 30 to 50, around somewhere in that range, but they do not live to be that old. So 15 to 18 years is the average, but they can live, or they've been known to live sometimes up to 30 years. So this is the last fact here before we move into our last segment. So they can smell their prey up to a kilometer away. And whenever I read something like this, I kind of question it. I don't know if this is necessarily true. It absolutely could be, but the same thing with sharks, right? Because I think everybody's heard at one point in time that sharks can kind of smell a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, but fairly recent studies have kind of debunked that, and it's actually not really true at all. They could not detect that kind of change, which is I think it's good to be skeptical sometimes, because that did seem kind of ridiculous that something can be that sensitive to changes, and in the case of the shark, it was actually wrong. It was wrong. So whenever I see something where they can smell their prey up to a kilometer away, or they can hear a branch breaking 30 kilometers away, that's of course an exaggeration, but I try to be a little bit skeptical when I read stuff like that, but it could be true, but they have a strong sense of smell, so that part is definitely true, which they will use to find breathing holes in the ice. So marine animals, they need to go up for breath. There's no real big marine animal that doesn't need to go up for a breath, at least that I know of. And they will find these breathing holes in the ice, and they will actually sit and just wait until a seal comes up for air. And then they'll kind of do that same. So they like this, or they don't like. Not that they like it or not, but they have found that they are more successful if they kind of sit and wait, or having this stealth approach to hunting. And they can detect a seal in the water beneath a meter of compacted snow. So they have this kind of a keen sense of, or instinct rather. So they find those breathing holes in the ice, and they will just sit and wait patiently for a seal to kind of come up for air. And let's get into the last segment. So here on the show, I always love to end the show with a kind of something about the name of the animal that we're talking about. Could be a history of the name, could be anything, what the name means in a different language. So in the case of polar bears, they have actually a variety of names all around the world, it seems like. We have Ursus maritimus, which just means kind of sea bear. So Ursus is bear, maritimus is kind of the sea, water sort of thing. But they're also known as ice bears, Isbjorn, white bear, Lord of the Arctic, old man in the fur cloak, white sea deer. So they have different sort of names all around the world, and I thought that was an interesting kind of fact about the name. So all around the world, it's known as different things. Nanook, I'm not sure what Nanuq. It's I guess that comes from another language, but they have different names all over, in different cultures and whatnot. So that's a little bit of a little name fact for you. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're still awake, of course, I mean, whether you're awake or not, thank you guys for taking this adventure with polar bears with me here. I really enjoyed learning about it. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, you can always shoot me an email. And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can be sure to follow it. You can share it with somebody else that wants to relax with animal facts. And I just want to tell you guys, I really appreciate you downloading the podcasts, tuning in every episode to relax and to learn with me here. It is so greatly appreciated. And yeah, that's all. That's the episode. And I hope to see you guys next episode with a new animal. Take care.